To put this in simpler terms, I, a 27-year-old man, feel overlooked compared to my 29-year-old sister, Ella. Ella has always been the favorite in our family. She was supposed to finish college last year, but chose to drop out during her final year to pursue a career in music with her band, which she formed in her second year of college. Despite poor grades and attendance, it wasn't the college that expelled her. Leaving was entirely her choice. Most of us thought quitting college for a music career was a risky move, but I kept my opinions to myself because I didn't feel it was my place to comment, and I doubted Ella would appreciate my input. Unfortunately, her decision didn't pan out as she hoped. Within 3 months, the band replaced her with a more talented music editor, and she returned home without a degree or job prospects. She tried to form a new band, but with no success, as her friends weren't music editor and weren't willing to abandon their own careers for her project. Now, she's unemployed and living off our parents, who seem to pity her and support her financially. This situation is frustrating for me because when I finished high school, my parents made it clear that I was on my own and had to finance my college education through loans. I recently graduated, but my parents missed my graduation to throw a party for Ella. When our grandparents discovered they were funding Ella's lifestyle while I struggled with loans, they stopped supporting her financially. I find it unfair that my parents continued to support Ella while I had to fend for myself. It seems they are more forgiving of her failures, treating them as misfortunes, whereas I am expected to be self-sufficient. This disparity in treatment highlights a clear favoritism, which is hard to accept. It didn't really shock me when I figured out the situation, since my parents had always treated my sister Ella differently. They made her pay her own way through college, so I had no illusions about getting any special help myself. By then, I had come to the realization that I wasn't the favorite child, and I braced myself to finance my own college education through loans or part-time jobs. However, the realization hit harder when I found out they allowed Ella to live with them without paying rent, despite her being an adult who frequently made excuses for her unemployment and lack of effort in finding a job. This stark difference in how we were treated made me feel deeply unfair, prompting me to confront my parents multiple times. Unfortunately, these confrontations often ended with them emotionally manipulating the situation to their advantage, making it increasingly difficult for me to distance myself from them. Everything came to a head about a week ago, providing me the final push I needed to sever ties. I had invited them to my graduation party, which was only a 4-hour drive from our home, surely a manageable trip. But they started to make excuses, claiming work commitments prevented them from coming. This seemed odd to me. Taking a single day off to celebrate their son's graduation didn't seem like too much to ask. Their true motive for missing my graduation was revealed during one of our arguments. They were planning a party for Ella instead. It was to commemorate the graduation she never had, as she had dropped out 8 months before finishing her degree the previous year. They had organized this to lift her spirits, without her knowledge. I suggested they postpone her party and attend my graduation, but they refused, expecting me to understand and accept their decision to support Ella on that particular day. I was stunned by their willingness to miss my graduation to host a party for my sister, who had chosen to leave school. I couldn't hide my frustration any longer, and during a heated phone call, I expressed how neglected I felt. I accused them of always putting Ella first, neglecting to encourage her independence and progress, and by doing so, ensuring I could never truly rely on or trust them again. I ended the call by telling them they were failing us both as parents. Their response was simply that I was overreacting, but it felt like much more than that to me. It was a defining moment of realization about our family dynamics. For my graduation, it seemed fine to me that my parents wouldn't be attending, as it appeared that my sister, Ella, needed their support more urgently. Recognizing that further discussion was pointless, I ended the call and decided instead to reach out to my grandparents to invite them to the ceremony. Although we weren't particularly close with my mom's parents who lived out of state, I shared a stronger bond with my dad's parents. They had even co-signed a student loan for me, stepping in at a time when I preferred not to involve my own parents. My grandparents were well aware of the strained dynamics between my parents and me, and they had always shown me sympathy. They had even attempted to make my father see the unfair and unhealthy differences in how he treated Ella and me, although it never seemed to change anything. However, their efforts meant the world to me, and it reinforced the close relationship I had with them. So, when my parents declined to attend my graduation, I naturally turned to my grandparents. Overwhelmed with emotion, I shared everything with them during our call, and even though I tried to assure them that none of this was their fault, they apologized profusely, feeling guilty for the situation. They reassured me of their support and ominously promised that they would make my parents regret the pain they had caused me, promises made in the heat of their anger. The reality of their intervention hit home later that night when my dad called me past 2:10 a.m., furiously accusing me of being selfish and overdramatic. Confused, I urged him to explain himself, only to learn that shortly after my emotional call, my grandparents had confronted my parents at their home in a heated exchange. They sharply criticized them and even harshly rebuked Ella, calling her out for her laziness after dropping out of college. Despite the harshness, their actions stemmed from years of frustration, especially since they had been financially supporting Ella through my parents. This bold move by my grandparents was a stark reminder of their fierce loyalty and support, highlighting the deep-seated issues within our family dynamics. For a long time, my father had exploited the situation, but it all came to a head when my grandfather decided he'd had enough and couldn't let it go on. My dad had misled my grandparents into thinking that Ella, his daughter-in-law, was actively job hunting but unable to find anything suitable. This, however, was far from the truth. Whenever I visited home, Ella was either idly passing time at home or out drinking with friends, showing no real interest in securing employment, and my parents were apparently okay with this, but knew very well that my grandparents wouldn't be, so they chose to deceive them. After discussing this with me, my grandparents realized they couldn't overlook the deceit any longer. They had been aware of Ella's lack of effort in finding a job, yet they continued to financially support her through my parents, because she was still their granddaughter. But upon learning the full extent of the situation, they decided to stop sending money, which led to a significant confrontation. My father then pressured me to intervene and mend things with my grandparents, wrongly blaming me for escalating the situation due to some previous family disagreements about not attending my graduation. He even slipped up and mentioned that my grandparents were planning to start giving the financial support directly to me instead. Upset, I hung up on my father and immediately called my grandparents, who confirmed their new plan to support me directly, explaining it was their way of compensating for the hardships I'd faced and ensuring a smoother start to my post-graduation life. Initially, I was hesitant to accept the money, intending to find a job and support myself traditionally. However, after some thought, I accepted their generous offer, realizing that accepting help wasn't an admission of failure, but an embrace of support from those who genuinely wished to see me succeed and be happy. I wholeheartedly embraced my grandparents' suggestions, feeling aligned with their perspective. Consequently, I found myself ignoring repeated attempts from my parents and my friend Ella to reach out. They bombarded my phone with messages and calls which, upon discovering the extent of their communication the following morning, I chose to block. They all seemed to echo a singular demand, to resolve an ongoing issue. They accused me of being unreasonable for not addressing their financial needs, which they deemed more pressing than my reservations. Ella, too, was insistent, claiming her current emotional state prevented her from working and that she needed time to focus on personal healing for a brighter future. She suggested I should be more empathetic rather than prioritizing material concerns. Despite this, I felt justified in accepting financial assistance from my grandparents. Historically, my family had emotionally manipulated me, exploiting my tendency to reconcile after disputes, regardless of their legitimacy. I had always assumed familial support was unconditional, a common belief instilled from childhood. However, I've come to realize that their affection is contingent upon my compliance, a realization that has liberated me from their expectations. Now, as I prepare for my graduation, I am comforted by the knowledge that my grandparents, who genuinely care for me, will be in attendance. This marks a significant step in reclaiming my happiness and autonomy. Additionally, I've begun to share more about my family dynamics with close friends, breaking my long-held silence. Their understanding and encouragement have reinforced my confidence in my choices, empowering me to no longer tolerate being treated dismissively. This newfound openness has been cathartic, fostering a sense of validation and support from those who truly value my well-being. I've decided not to back down anymore. I can't allow myself to be taken advantage of any longer. Unfortunately, my parents decided to attend my graduation, which was unexpected. Previously, they seemed indifferent about my milestones unless there was a financial incentive. At the ceremony, they were suddenly enthusiastic, eager to play the role of the supportive family, even though they weren't allowed inside without passes. I had made it clear that I would only discuss matters with them after the event. After the graduation, my grandparents and I met with my parents at a nearby hotel for lunch. Right from the start, I set boundaries, insisting we avoid topics that could lead to conflict, as I was in a celebratory mood. However, my parents, along with Ella, who apologized but couldn't attend due to a job interview, began to express remorse for their past actions. They admitted their failings as parents and expressed a desire to mend our relationship. Despite their apologies, their sincerity didn't convince me. Their change of heart seemed prompted more by my grandparents' decision to cut off financial support than by genuine regret. While they pleaded for forgiveness and a chance to make amends, I wasn't ready to let them back into my life. I needed space to focus on my own future, free from the emotional turmoil they had caused. Even as my grandparents supported my stance, my parents couldn't accept my decision. They argued that as their child, it was my duty to forgive, equating my childhood errors with their long-term failings as parents. This comparison only highlighted their inability to grasp the seriousness of their actions. Ultimately, I maintained that they needed to respect my need for space if they were truly remorseful. My priority was to build a life independently, a decision that was reasonable yet difficult. But it was necessary for my own well-being and future. It became clear to me that my parents were siding with my grandparents primarily for financial reasons. During a confrontation, I was forthright with them, letting them know that their attempts to sway me were transparent and wouldn't work. My mother tried to elicit sympathy by crying, but having witnessed similar scenes before, I was unaffected. In a public setting, I firmly asked her to stop, warning that I would leave with my grandparents if she continued to make me uncomfortable. She persisted in her tears for a while, accusing me of being unfeeling and claiming her emotions were genuine. However, I remained skeptical and started to walk away, prompting her to plead with me to stay. Eventually, my parents seemed to accept that they couldn't manipulate the situation. We ended up having a quiet lunch after the meal arrived and parted ways somewhat awkwardly. I felt a mix of relief and pride after the encounter. It provided closure and affirmed my ability to stand up for myself, something I hadn't always managed in the past. The support of my grandparents was comforting, and it mattered most to me that day. It turned out to be a rather fulfilling day. A few days later, following a graduation ceremony, I decided to cut contact with my parents. Surprisingly, Ella, who had minimal involvement in my life and wasn't at the lunch, began attacking me on social media. Despite our strained relationship, she posted harsh critiques, calling me ungrateful and threatening to sever ties with anyone who remained in contact with me. Although it was perplexing, given her limited role in my life, I had to address the inaccuracies she spread. The public nature of our dispute was unfortunate, especially since we share many mutual friends from high school. I felt compelled to share my side publicly to clarify the situation rather than responding individually, despite the discomfort of such a public fallout. This social media battle was frustrating and embarrassing, but necessary to stand up for my truth. Recently, a significant amount of new information has emerged, prompting me to reassess my relationship with my parents. It appears that reconciliation or forgiveness won't be possible anytime soon, and I've decided to cease all contact with them indefinitely due to their unfair treatment towards me. This decision follows one exhausting days of continuous arguments triggered by a post from my sister Ella. She attempted to defend our parents by falsely claiming they treated us equally, which is far from the truth. According to Ella, She had experienced no more privilege than I had and accused me of playing the victim to gain our grandparents' sympathy. Ella also revisited her past hardships, including her time with a band where she felt used and eventually discarded. Despite needing to take out student loans for college, just like me, she believed she could have thrived if not for the negative influence of her so-called friends. She shared that she was merely a temporary replacement in the band, a fact only clarified when a bandmate finally confronted her. This confrontation revealed that her permanent inclusion in the band was never the plan, especially once they decided to pursue music full-time. Her decision to drop out of college, based on false hopes provided by her bandmates, was ill-advised and led her to twist the narrative to portray herself as a victim. Moreover, Ella and my parents maintained the lie that she financed her education through loans, whereas in reality, our parents paid her tuition. This was confirmed by the same bandmate who called her out. Following this revelation, Ella deleted her defensive posts, attempting to erase the evidence of her deception. With these truths brought to light, I've resolved to sever ties with my family. My grandparents have also chosen to distance themselves from my parents and Ella, reflecting the depth of the deception and betrayal. Despite the pain and anger this situation has caused, I am at peace with my decision. Moving forward, my grandparents will be my primary family connection, and I am committed to focusing on a future without the dishonesty that has marked my past relationships with my parents and sister.